it's funny how the smallest towns always seem to have the biggest stories. Kind that stick with you, creep up on you when you least expect it. This one, it's been with me for years now. It happened on a cool October night in a little town I didn't even know the name of at the time. I was driving through Kentucky, heading back to Louisville after visiting some family down in Bowling Green. It was late, probably around 1:30, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. I was exhausted, but the road was dead quiet, and there was something peaceful about the way my headlights cut through the darkness. I'd taken the scenic route that night, a stretch of old highway that weaves through a few small towns, with names you'd miss if you blinked. You know, the kind places where the biggest landmark is the local diner, or the courthouse in the town square. I remember passing through one of these towns, Danby, I think it was called. Kind of place where Main Street is lined with mama and pop shops and antique stores, all with their lights off, shutters pulled down for the night. It was quiet. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. Kind of quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I was driving down Maple Avenue, just past the courthouse. The old brick building stood there like a sentinel in the night, its white columns glowing faintly under the dim light of a street lamp. That's when I saw her. At first, it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. Just a woman standing at the edge of the crosswalk, right on the corner where Maple meets Jefferson Street. I slowed down, instinctively figured she was waiting to cross. She was dressed strangely, though. That's what I noticed first. She wasn't wearing jeans or a hoodie or anything you'd expect to see someone wearing in the middle of the night in a quiet Kentucky town. And on this long, dark coat that went past her knees, the kind with buttons up the front. And on her head, a hat, one of those vintage hats women used to wear back in the 1940s, tilted to the side, with a little veil covering part of her face. I remember thinking it was odd, but hey, maybe she was coming from a costume party or something. Except there weren't any houses or bars open nearby, just a courthouse and a couple of darkened storefronts. I slowed my car to a near stop, waiting for her to step into the crosswalk. But she didn't move. She just stood there, her head slightly tilted, staring straight ahead. Not at me, not at the street, just straight ahead. I tapped my horn. A short, polite honk, nothing aggressive. Her head turned slowly, so slowly it sent a chill down my spine. And then she looked at me. That face, God, I still see it in my nightmares sometimes. Her skin was pale, almost gray, like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. Her eyes were hollow, glassy, like she was staring through me, not at me. And her expression, blank, no emotion, no fear, no anger, nothing. Held my gaze for what felt like an eternity. And then, without breaking eye contact, she stepped off the curb and started walking across the street. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Something about her felt wrong. The way she moved, it was almost mechanical, like each step was being guided by invisible strings. She reached the middle of the crosswalk right in front of my car. My headlights lit up her figure, but something wasn't right. There wasn't one. And then, just like that, she was gone. I don't mean she turned a corner or walked out of sight. I mean she vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, gone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, even leaned forward to look through my windshield, thinking maybe I was just seeing things. But there was nothing, no sign of her anywhere. I sat there for a good minute, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Finally, I shook it off and drove away, my hands trembling on the wheel. The next morning, I stopped at a little diner on the outskirts of town, Grady's Cafe. I think it was called. One of those places where the coffee's strong, the biscuits are homemade, and the regulars sit at the counter swapping stories. I couldn't shake what had happened, so I asked the waitress about it. Told her I'd seen a woman at the crosswalk near the courthouse the night before. She stopped pouring my coffee and gave me this look, part curiosity, part something else. You saw her, didn't you? She asked. Oh, I said, though I already knew. She leaned in a little closer, dropping her voice like she didn't want anyone else to hear. They call her the woman at the crosswalk. Folks around here have been seeing her for years. My stomach dropped. She went on to tell me the story. Back in the 1940s, a young woman, her name was Eleanor, apparently was hit by a car at that exact crosswalk. It was late at night, just like when I'd seen her. Witnesses said she'd been coming from the courthouse after visiting her husband. who was standing trial for some petty theft charge. She didn't make it, died right there in the street. Ever since then, people have reported seeing her, always at that crosswalk, always in the same clothes she was wearing the night she died. She's waiting, the waitress said. For what? I asked. The woman shrugged, her eyes darting to the door like Eleanor might walk in at any moment. Maybe to cross, maybe for someone to notice her. Who knows? I couldn't let it go after that. When I got home, I started digging newspaper archives, local legends, anything I could find. Sure enough, there were reports of a woman matching Eleanor's description going back decades. Some people claimed to have seen her walk straight through their cars. Others said she disappears the second you take your eyes off her. One story stuck with me, though. A truck driver in the 1970s said he stopped for her late one night, just like I had. Only when she turned to look at him, he swore he saw blood running down her face, dripping onto her coat. He quit his job the next day and never drove through Danby again. It's been years since that night, but I still think about her every time I drive through a small town. Every time I see an empty crosswalk lit by a lonely street lamp. Who was she really? Was it Eleanor? Or was it just my tired mind playing tricks on me? But one thing's for sure, if you ever find yourself driving through Danby late at night and you see a woman standing at the crosswalk, don't stop. There are places like this all over America, places where the past refuses to stay buried. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, share it in the comments. Who knows? Your story might just be next.